Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. So today we're going to be talking about one of the most common pieces of writing advice, maybe the most common piece of writing advice, show don't tell. We're going to be talking about what it actually means, how to apply it, and is it as important as everyone says? So is show don't tell all it's cracked up to be? Well, the short answer is yes. Show don't tell is really important. Writing advice and learning how to show properly is one of the most important skills that a writer can develop. A lot of new writers don't know how to show because it is a skill that takes time to learn and develop. So a lot of new writers rely way too much on telling, and more noticeably weak telling, and it really shows in their writing. And it makes the work feel distant and flat. However, the long answer is that both showing and telling are important tools. A better way to phrase this advice would be show and tell, and learn how to do both well and use each when necessary, but I guess that doesn't roll off the tongue as easily as show don't tell does. So what is showing? The reason this advice is so hammered into our brains is because showing is actually quite a difficult skill to really learn, and even writers who've been writing for quite a long time sometimes still struggle to show adequately in their work. It's something that seems very simple, but it can actually be really hard to learn and implement. Showing means portraying the story through description rather than exposition, allowing the reader to experience the story and make their own judgments rather than just being told what to think or being told how things are. We often use emotion as the primary example of showing versus telling, but we can see these two types of writing in pretty much any element of story. So here's an example of telling. Martha was angry. She would never forgive Pete for sabotaging her in the art competition. She wanted revenge. Here's an example of those same emotions and ideas, expressed through showing instead. Martha slammed the art room door behind her, tensing her fists. She kicked a chair and it skittered across the room. Oh, Pete has messed with the wrong aspiring painter, she huffed to herself as her eyes landed on his prized artwork, drying on an easel across the room. She picked up a bottle of yellow acrylic paint. He'll regret this. In the telling example, we don't have any evidence to support the fact that Martha is angry. It's just something we're told and we're supposed to just accept it. We don't have any evidence to show us that she won't forgive Pete or that she wants revenge, and so we don't really feel drawn into the story. Whereas in the second example, where these same ideas are shown instead of told, we learn the same information through active detail. So we're actually given evidence to support these things. The reader is therefore able to make their own judgments, and so it feels a lot more convincing and a lot more immediate to read. We can tell that Martha is angry from her reactions, such as tensing her fists, kicking a chair, and slamming the door. We can tell she wants revenge because it's clear that she's going to destroy his painting. Now, the sentences in the telling example aren't inherently bad. Sometimes you need and want to state something directly. Too much telling or telling when showing would be more rich and convincing can be a real detriment to a piece. But you can use both effectively in combination. Some telling, embedded in the context of a scene that also effectively uses showing, can really clarify aspects of the story, and the telling doesn't stick out so bad. So let's combine the two previous examples to have a piece that uses both showing and telling to convey its ideas. Martha slammed the art room door behind her, tensing her fists. She kicked a chair and it skittered across the room. Oh, Pete has messed with the wrong aspiring painter, she huffed to herself as her eyes landed on his prized artwork drying on the easel across the room. She would never forgive Pete for sabotaging her in the art competition. She wanted revenge. She picked up a bottle of yellow acrylic paint. He'll regret this. Here, the telling sentences are woven into a larger scene paired with active and immediate detail and used to support the evidence which we see through showing. So they don't stand out the way that they did in the example that was exclusively telling, where there was no immediacy or richness. We still got all the same information in the example with only showing, so this is a case where maybe you don't need the telling at all, but that's to show that when used in combination with effective showing, the telling doesn't stand out so much and it can actually be a benefit to the clarity of a piece. In general, we want to show information that needs evidence for the reader to believe it or feel convinced by it. But we can tell static information that doesn't need any evidence to feel convincing. Simply telling us that a character is a brilliant mastermind without any evidence to support it will end up falling flat because we really need to see this happening on the page in order to believe it and understand it. However, telling us that a character is 6 feet tall or that they work in a post office is fine because these aren't really debatable details. We don't need to see these things in action, such as seeing the 6-foot tall character, I don't know, bump into a low-hanging tree or walking around wearing their post office uniform? Because these are kind of just objective facts and we have no reason to question them. In fact, trying to show these things when they don't need to be shown could actually weaken the writing, such as trying to include a convoluted description where we show how tall a character is rather than just saying that he was really tall. Or awkwardly inserting some narrative where a character just conveniently brings up that he works in a post office when it would be fine to just state this in the narrative. So showing and telling aren't in opposition. They're tools that are meant to work together. Telling clarifies information and is an important tool for creating a clear narrative, whereas showing allows for richness, depth, immediacy, and implication to be built off of that information. In general, telling will stand out as weak in these cases. If it flattens an emotional detail that would be more compelling if shown, if it contradicts what is shown, if it's not convincing on its own or doesn't have substantial evidence to support it, if there's too much of it, and if it isn't written with any skill. However, too much showing can also cause problems, such as clarity issues, convoluted phrasing, overwriting if the writer is going out of their way to show things that could much more efficiently and effectively just be told in a single sentence, and embellished writing that isn't actually showing. A really common error is for writers to embellish their prose a little to try and avoid telling, but they're not actually avoiding it. For example, labeling emotions, but just doing it in a more flowery way. So instead of saying Martha was angry, saying anger coursed through Martha's veins. These are both examples of telling. In both cases, we're being told that Martha is angry. One of them is just a little more embellished. If you're getting ready to start writing a novel and you want an extra level of guidance, both in the process and the craft, you can check out our new comprehensive course hosted by Tom Bromley. This 3-month course features daily lessons on craft, guest interviews with published authors, weekly webinars, and live editing sessions, as well as connections with your cohort of fellow writers. You can find more information linked in the description. So to close off this video, let's run through a couple tips for using show don't tell effectively. First of all, write exposition with confidence and skill. If you can learn how to write exposition well and use it confidently rather than being afraid of exposition or information, it'll make the telling actually a lot stronger within the narrative. Telling is fine as long as it's well written. You don't want weak telling. So focus on learning how to write exposition well and using it confidently, and it will really be a benefit to the clarity of your work. Tip 2, and building off of that, is to develop your authorial voice. The stronger your authorial voice, the less the telling will stand out as telling, and the more showing and telling will blend into a single narrative voice. 3, remember that telling in narrative is usually stronger than showing in dialogue. Now, we can definitely use dialogue to show. For example, if there's tension between two characters, we can show that tension through how they speak to each other. But dialogue is not the best to show us just information. For example, if a character starts narrating about their job and their background, especially if it's information that everyone in the room already knows. In this case, it's actually a lot more subtle and just seamless to have that information through the narrative. A lot of writers try to put too much information into dialogue in order to avoid telling in narrative, so instead use dialogue to show a character's traits and their relationships with each other, rather than putting the burden of using it to convey information. Narrative is a much better tool for conveying information than dialogue. The next tip is to try and multitask with your scenes. You don't want to have scenes that are just there to convey a single piece of information, especially one that could just be conveyed through telling. Each scene should be an active and living moment that develops the story and characters, and you can convey information through each scene, but you don't want to create scenes just to convey information. The next tip is to master psychic distance. Psychic distance is a really important concept in writing. Basically, it's how close the narrative is to the character. So with a really distant psychic distance, there's a full separation between the narrative voice and the character. With a really close psychic distance, the closest possible would be like a stream of consciousness first person. There's no separation between narrative voice and character at all. Telling can feel really weak if the psychic distance is too far. So learning how to master psychic distance and control the psychic distance and write with a close psychic distance even when telling will really improve the quality of your telling. I'll leave some resources below on psychic distance if you want to learn more about this concept. The next step is to choose your details with intention. Using detail choice to show is a great tactic. You can show a lot about a character, world, story, theme, create subtext through the details that you choose, but that means choosing details with intention. So as you're choosing details and what you want to describe, think about what you're trying to show with the scene and choose the details appropriately. And finally, play out your scenes fully and actively. When we're really close and immediate in a moment and that moment feels active and fully played out, that usually means that you're showing the characters and the story in action. So really think about playing scenes out fully and keeping them immediate. Play out active scene rather than letting scenes that should be active drift outwards into narrative summary. There's nothing wrong with narrative summary, but when you have an active moment in the story, play it out fully. So those are some tips for showing versus telling, and how to actually implement this age-old piece of writing advice. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Friday on this channel. Until next time, bye.